Yep, we're streaming and my phone's up there.
Everything's on, everything's on live, okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'd like to convene the March 24th meeting, 2020 meeting in the Land Bank. And we have a full agenda today. We got a lot of topics to cover, so we will get started. That's why we wanted to get started early. We originally had it scheduled for 2 o'clock, but moved it up to 1:15 because we do have a very full agenda today. So with that, I will, make introductions real quickly. Oh, there's Mike Schuling. Come on up, Mike.
We kept the light on for you.
That's right. Introductions, Commissioner Gary Merrill, I'm Commissioner Jeff Benton, Trustee Administrator
Mike Schuling.
Don Ranke, our County Treasurer, and on the live stream is Dave Eflin, the Delaware City's Economic Development, or Economic Director. So thank you, Dave, and thanks for everybody again moving their schedule to make the 1:15 meeting. First order of business is to approve, I think, just the March 3rd meetings. Oh, I did it with that introductions. That's good enough. Sarah, do you want to, we're set with everybody's gotten the March 3rd minutes?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, I will ask if anybody has any changes, corrections, et cetera, to the March 3rd meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
Got a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Schuling. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the motion passes for the minutes. We do have some continuing organization issues to address. We do not have as of currently, we do not have a secretary or treasurer on the Land Bank Board. So I'm chair, Commissioner Merrill is vice chair, but we do need to appoint a secretary and a treasurer. And Don Ranke has graciously volunteered to be the treasurer, and Dave Eflin has graciously volunteered to be secretary. I don't know if anybody had any comments or anything.
I'll make a motion to approve Dave Eflin as secretary and Don Ranke as treasurer.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Schuling. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, congratulations, and thank you, gentlemen, for volunteering, because those can be, those are certainly important spots. Next, one of the important items of business for today is insurance discussion. As the Land Bank is now poised to get significantly more active and take on properties in the coming months, a number of properties in the coming months, we need to make sure that we have the proper insurance coverages in place. And today with us is Brian Smith from SFM Insurance, local agency who has helped us in the past and represents us with Corsa, the county's insurance provider. So I've asked Brian to come today and talk about alternatives, because we have D&O insurance in place, and I think everybody's, that's good. But now we had intentionally put off getting any property insurance in place because we didn't have any properties to insure. Now that we have the jail on our books and we have a number of other properties on the horizon to come to the Land Bank, we need to get the property insurance, both liability and physical coverage, in place. So Brian has done some research on that, and I will turn it over to him.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I have some information here for each one of you.
Thank you.
Inside these packets.
Okay, thank you.
On the left-hand side is your actual directors and officers policy. Commissioner Benton asked that I bring that for you, so that is what's currently in place, and that renews on May 1st here in 2021. So we're actively getting the renewal information there. You were correct. 2 years ago, we put the D&O in place. We had nothing else going on, so we held off looking at the general liability and the property until the time has come. So we have really three options that we can utilize for the land bank in ensuring the general liability in the property. So the first is that if the commissioners so choose, you can join the Delaware County's policy through Corsa. The nice thing about that policy is that there's no additional premium that is due until we add properties or until we add an actual employee of the land bank and payroll becomes involved. The negative to going on to that policy is the size of the deductible that the county has, which currently is $100,000 for any individual claim. So when we looked a couple years ago at the directors and officers, your board decided, let's get an independent policy, let's not go on the county's policy to avoid that $100,000 deductible, which is why we have that through Cincinnati. In your packet also on the right-hand side, you'll have two proposals. One is from Corsa because they will write the policy independently of the county. This gives us a $2,500 deductible. The negative to this policy is that it comes with a $2,500 minimum premium on the general liability. So if we have no properties, we have nothing in our, in our assets, you're still paying $2,500. So to me, that doesn't seem the best option out of the three. The next option is with Cincinnati Insurance Company. We took a look at all of our independent carriers, and Cincinnati provides the best coverage and the best pricing. What you're seeing there is a little bit different than what you will see in a normal situation because we have the old jail on that policy. So you'll notice that the annual premium there is $10,000, $10,112. $7,015 of that is the old jail. So once the jail sells, you dispose of it, whatever you do with it, it leaves your books, that $7,000 goes away. Also on there, we have the way we originally proposed and presented this policy is Cincinnati bases everything off of the demolition cost, what you would spend in a year with subcontractors demolishing buildings. So when I originally worked on this, the indication was there would be probably about 12 buildings in any one year that you would be demolishing. So we put a $204,000 subcontractor cost for that demolition. Now granted, if we're not going to see that in the near future, we can back that down. Or we can actually remove that from the policy. So take the old jail off, reduce the subcontractor cost there, and your annual premium comes down to $1,876. So that's typically what we would see with other land banks that we insure throughout Ohio. When you add a property or you add vacant land, we do need to put that on the policy. So we would have to have a listing and a current list of properties coming on and off. And then there's small charges, $3 for the general liability, and then if you decide to choose or you decide to add coverage for the property, then that individual building would be rated on its own merits. So you've got a pretty big property sitting behind us here, and you can see that's $7,000.
So quick question.
Yes.
So as we add properties, it would adjust upwards slightly. As we eliminate properties, it would adjust down.
That is
It's going to
correct.
be kind of fluid during the year.
Very fluid during the year, yes.
So the other observation is there's really two different kinds of properties. Properties we already own, the jail,
Right.
which we were assuming that $100,000 liability on that to begin with.
Mhm.
Those are different than properties that we would.
That's right.
I'm just making an observation.
Yes.
Than the traditional properties that would be talked about in 90% of the cases.
Right.
So I guess the question is, should the jail or any other buildings that are currently handled by the county, we've been willing to accept that liability, should those be treated differently or not? Or
Yes, I think so. So with the jails behind us here, obviously you want to carry coverage on that. If you pick up a property that's had, tax delinquencies and gets thrown into the land bank, you may choose to say that's an $80,000 property. We're not going to insure that because we're going to knock it down, or we're going to sell it as is, and they're going to deal with it at that point. But we want to have the liability there in case somebody goes through there and there's issues or damages done that way. So yes, we would look at each individual property and determine if we want coverage on that or not.
yeah, my point was, those properties are being covered differently than future properties would be.
Right.
And do we make a distinction there, or we don't make a distinction?
No.
You've got two locations, 140 North Sandusky, why is that one?
I think that is where we had the land bank's office
Okay,
as the primary. So if that's changed, we need to update that address.
yeah, I mean, the land bank itself doesn't have an office.
Right, but we need to put a physical address
Okay,
for
okay.
someplace.
That's your address, isn't it?
And I was gonna say, I think it's the treasurer's office is
Yeah,
probably
okay,
what it
makes
was at the time that we wrote the policies.
In here, it's listed as building 1.
Yes. So location 1, building 1 would be the office there. There's no personal property in the office, so it's just liability. Building 2 would be the old jail address, and that would be associated with the liability there as well.
Okay, so you've got $7,000 on building 1?
That's how much it would cost to replace, or the insurance premium if that building went down today and we had to rebuild it at the
okay.
$4.5 million.
Have you
I-
inspected that building?
This is what the valuation is on the current policy with Delaware County, because it's on a replacement.
Corsa?
With Corsa, excuse, yes.
Wouldn't it be better for you to go out and inspect it and then come back and say, because that building, I think $7,000 is pretty heavy.
It is for a $4.5 million building, it is not. Now, if the land bank chooses to insure the building at something differently than the $4.5 million that the county is currently insuring it for, then that premium will come down. So if you say we only want
Couldn't we have our own
$500,000 on that.
policy separate from the county?
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
Could we not have our own policy separate from the county? Because it's not worth 4.5 million.
You currently do not have a separate
We'd be happy to take
policy.
a check for $4.5 million.
Exactly. So the difference here is you also have to look at, differentiate between market value and replacement value. So when the county went out and had all their buildings appraised, and they said, yes, we want to, if that building goes down, we want to rebuild it the way it is, that is what the replacement valuation came back as. So that's what we used as our starting point. So if the land bank chooses to.
I get that. I
Mhm.
do, I honestly do, because I own a few older buildings that are
Mhm.
all within a couple blocks or here, a bunch of them. And our premium on those is half of that. My question is instead of getting stuck with what the counties, county thinks are gonna be, if something happened to that, I don't see us rebuilding it. And I
So
don't
we
honestly.
build back and form this.
So that is a decision for your board to make if you want to move forward with this. What valuation do we want to put on here?
Right.
So I used, just for the starting point, the valuation that the county had. So if
Corsa.
you, Corsa in the Delaware County has.
So theoretically, if it's going off the course of policy, there'd be a reduction there?
Correct.
Now, it's not $7,000, I'm guessing,
It would probably be pretty close, if not a little bit higher.
you think?
Yes.
So there's a wash there, is what you're saying?
So it would be a wash, yes.
Is that something that you would take care of if?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, given that we're very likely to sell that building in the next month or two,
Mhm.
I'm okay going forward with keeping the insurance as it is. I mean, we could go out and get another appraisal.
No, I wasn't asking for an appraisal. What happens when and we're gonna be dealing with we're gonna be dealing with a lot more than
Oh,
a few
absolutely.
properties.
Right.
And so there should be a policy in place that says, okay, if we get this property over in Ashley, then there should be a process for you guys to bring it in for minimum coverage until you can go out there and do one of your,
Correct.
hire your third-party person to go out there and inspect it and, determine what they think it is. So I struggle with $7,000. I do. And my concern is once we start down that road and saying, okay, well, we're okay with $7,000 on this, and how much is it gonna be for this house that's worth, $25,000 or $30,000 in Ashley that we're getting ready to take? Are you gonna hit us? There should be a process, and I'm also concerned I'm thinking that over the next 6 to 8 months, that we're gonna have anywhere from 50 to 100 properties come into the land bank through this process. I'm gonna sit with Tyler. Tyler and I have an appointment Friday afternoon. And there's 1,006 properties that's in this pool. that have been kicked around for 10 years. And so we're going to go through, the other thing I want to try to do is get a typical feel for what type of property that we're looking at this, with these 1,006. You know, none of them are going to be as nice as the jail.
Correct.
At least I'm going to tell you up front, unless we get this assisted living facility that's brand new, I doubt that we're going to, you know. But anyways, I'd like to get an idea of what our typical property is going to look like, because we may have a lot of vacant ground, we may have a lot of property that's worth less than $100,000.
Right.
I don't see any property that we would put on the books to rebuild it for what the appraised value is. So typically how that's dealt with larger properties, you know, you take a look at what your mortgage is in regards to what you think the insurance should be versus the replacement value. So anyways, I hear what you're saying, Jeff, and if that's the direction you want to go, I'll support it. But, you know.
I think what I'm interested in particular with this one is, and why Brian's here is so we set up a process so that we are positioned as these properties, numerous properties in the next 6 to 12 months come in, we have a process in place to properly place liability and property where appropriate. This one, you know, if we change it, and we can change it, but it's going to be a process, because this one is unique. You know, it's already on the county's books, on Corsa's books, at a $4.5 million insured value, and the county is paying $7,000 right now to insure it. So we could go through the process to change that and reappraise it, but we're going to be rid of it in a month
I'm not
or
looking
two.
to reappraise it. That's
Well, you'd
not
have
what
to
I would do.
reappraise
Well, you wouldn't.
something.
You wouldn't have to.
In
I'm
some
sorry. I don't mean to
capacity.
disagree. I apologize for that. If I'm out of order, I apologize.
That's right.
But they typically send out I'm sorry, the insurance
But
company typically
not a
sends out
formal
a third
appraisal.
party.
You'd have to change the appraised value is what I meant.
Well, they would send out a third party consulting group, and they'll come out and take a look at the building and say, okay, you got this issue, you got this issue, you know, these are the issues you have that could have increased the liability, fix those, okay? And oh, by the way, let's come to an agreeable amount based upon your strategy, not the county strategy. So again, I'm willing to do whatever you want, Mr. Chairman. It's just that I think going forward, we really should have a process.
Yep.
because we're going to maybe have a snowball effect.
Yep.
So
You know.
typically, the process with other
Yeah,
land
that's,
banks that we
Brian could
work
describe
with,
that.
they'll notify us, hey, we've just taken these 4 properties, here's the address. These are the properties, these 2 properties we want to provide property coverage on. And between the land bank and our agency, we will run replacement valuations. And so we come up with a quick estimate of what it would be to replace it based on square footage and local building costs. And then that'll also help determine, that's more than we want to spend for this property, we're just going to not insure it. Or we can insure it at replacement value, or we can insure it at the actual cash value. Actual cash value would be much lower. That's where we see most of
The
land banks
insurance
do that.
value minus the depreciation to get
That's
the cash
correct.
value. So
Yes.
I get that, but I mean, and that's what we should be doing.
Correct.
And that's kind of what I'm
Yes.
throwing out there.
So typically, if that had been a normal building, that's what we would have done. But since it's already on the county's books, and the county and the land bank are trying to determine who's going to insure it and where is it going to be insured, I just use the county's valuation at the time. That
Well, maybe
Corsa
the
came
county
up with.
commissioners would be kind enough to pay this premium till we sell it
I don't
and not
wanna-
ask for reimbursement
I
this
don't want to
first
speak out of
time.
turn, but I think if you look at the contract, there might be some stipulations in that between the county and the land bank, so,
Well, first of all, that is a unique building.
right,
We're not gonna that's not gonna be a repetitive situation.
correct.
And if the Corsa, which I sit on their board, if they're insuring it, we're not paying premium of $7,000, I would think, because it's got a deductible of $100,000 on it right now.
That is correct.
So it's something less than that, I would assume.
I would think that it'd be close to that 7,000 even with the 100,000.
Even with the deductible?
Yes, even because it is part of the larger blanket of properties that are insured by the county. And that's also insured on a different valuation form than a typical building because we're using historical valuations. If it went down today and the county was still going to occupy it, long-term, the commissioners made the decision a number of years ago to say we want to rebuild it back to the way it was today. Similar to the building we're standing in now, we wouldn't, you know, it would cost a lot more to rebuild it the way it is now than it would be if we just used standard building processes.
I understand the assumption, but the reality is we would not do that.
That's
It's probably.
And once you go through that building, you'll find that more than half of it's not even occupiable, as
Yes.
unoccupiable.
so.
It's jail cells.
All I can say on is that the commissioner made the decision to do that a number of years ago, and if we can take that to a separate conversation to talk about that. And again, we can insure that building at what value ever you feel that you want to insure it at, as long as we're within the actual
If
cash
we don't
value
do
of the
anything,
policy.
it's still under the county's insurance.
Actually, we need to do something because it is
Yeah.
technically not owned by the county, so therefore it is not technically insured under the course of
So we'll
policy.
really be getting a refund from Corsa regardless.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I'm anxious to get,
That's why
we need to get
to
this
speed
coverage in
process
place
up.
today, because I guess technically it's uninsured at this
Right.
point. So, I mean, again, I appreciate the points everyone's making, and I completely agree, but given that we're gonna sell this building presumably in the next month, maybe it'll be 2 months,
Right.
I don't think it's worth a whole lot of effort.
We're talking about a premium of $700 per month, roughly.
Right, so any unearned premium would come back to the land bank once the building was sold. So it's not you write a check for $7,000 and tomorrow you sell it, that you don't get any premium back. We're only going to charge the premium for the amount of time that you had it.
So to
Property
summarize, we're gonna get a refund from Corsa, which you're gonna take care of.
Yes,
Number two, we're probably talking about a month, 6 weeks, 2 months max, if we make any progress today, as far as.
It's probably gonna
insurance
be 90 to 120 is what it's gonna be.
goes. So I think. to
Based
Mr.
upon
Mitchell's
by the time you
point,
close,
contingency.
It's just a way to handle it, because it's unique, it's short term. So under that conditions, I think it's the best solution.
Now, the 7,000 is just the property insurance?
that is just for that particular building.
Now, where's the liability then?
So the liability, if you continue to go through there, you'll see $1 million of general liability. And then you'll also see $1 million umbrella. So we would have up to $2 million in any one occurrence. So if the land bank chooses not to purchase an umbrella, that's an additional $750 that comes off. But that just limits us to $1 million for any liability claim that comes through.
Is that whether we have 10 buildings or 100 buildings?
That would be exactly, so, per occurrence, up to a $2 million in any 1 year. So as more properties come on, we would then look to see if we wanted to have the umbrella. I personally recommend the umbrella because it just gives you $2 million, and that should handle most of the situations that you would be
Well, my
through.
point is, every time we add a house or a lot or something, it's not gonna go up.
No.
It's flat for the year.
Right, well, anytime you add property, so if we add vacant land, anything that's an acre or less is $3 annually. So it's not a large premium when you start adding the properties, and then as you take them off, again, that removes, and it's prorated based on the time that the land or the property is on the policy.
Procedurally going forward, do we notify you, you're gonna stay in touch
Yes.
and be aware, or?
Right, so typically, once properties come in, we can either do it in a batch situation where every month, hey, we got 4 new properties, these are when they were acquired, and we can put them on. If there's no activity, we don't need to hear from you. But typically, you know, if we haven't heard from you, we reach out every 6 months to, and definitely at the end of the year, just to make sure everything is up to.
So the summary then is on the 3rd page from the back?
That is
If we went-
correct.
If we went with Cincinnati and did the umbrella, it'd be $10,112.
Right. And then as you look at the coverages, you'll see that property is the 7,000, so once the jail's gone, that goes away. And then I would recommend that we look at reducing the demolition costs unless you feel we're going to have a number of buildings that you're going to demolish. Then we can reduce that even further.
And the property on that $10,112, that's the jail, right?
Yes, that is
So
correct.
this is overstating the real cost.
That's correct. That's why I was stating that here's where we start.
Right.
But if we were in a typical year, that's not what we're going to be looking at. So we're in an unusual situation because we have a unique property on the books. So,
Mr. Chairman, this is Dave. Can I ask a question?
Go right ahead, Dave.
What does it mean as to liability and insurance on the old jail with respect to having, I guess the county, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, or the county has a tenant in that building currently, so to speak, I believe as a judge, and that would continue for some period of time. Does that influence this decision at all? And I agree with the discussion about, in general, we should have, a policy of just administration of as we get properties on, do we check with the insurance company to understand what we're getting into insurance-wise, and then also just a policy on how we want to insure properties moving forward. The jail is probably it's a little bit of an odd one to start with, as we all recognize from the beginning of the land bank, but we'll learn a lot.
Dave brings up a good point. Typically in a lease situation, and I think that's the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Two tenants. One is the law library and the other is the
Fifth Circuit
judge.
Typically in the lease, you should have in there that the tenants have to provide you with general liability insurance and name you as an insured on that policy. And then it would be our responsibility at the land bank, I guess it'd be the treasurer's responsibility at the land bank, to make sure that those policies were that they were valid.
I agree. In the private sector, that's typical. In the public sector, we're obligated to provide an office for the judge.
For the fifth, I know you are.
Yeah,
But
so
do they
I
pay?
think
Do they
it's
pay
our
rent?
obligation to
Okay.
provide the insurance in that case.
That does raise a question. The
But it does
property
change-
that belongs to the county.
Right.
And theoretically, that is not part of this
correct.
transaction.
So
Is that still insured by Corsa?
that is correct, yes.
Now, Jeff, that changes a little bit because the county no longer owns it and the land bank does. I'm not disagreeing, and I have no problem with that. But Dave's right, we probably should have an additional insured policy to cover the
Right. So
potential liability.
Brian?
the
For being
county would
occupied.
add the land bank as additional insured for their use of the building. So in the event the county or any of the tenants of the county, which are all insured underneath the Corsa policy, if they name the land bank in the lawsuit, the county's policy through Corsa would pick up the coverage for the land bank. So that would be automatically done.
Now, just, the law libraries should be moving out in the next month to 2 months, so that leaves just the Supreme Court judge.
Yeah, I called John
Appeals
this
court
morning
judge.
and I basically asked the question, can we get them out in 60 to 90 days so we can avoid any rent lease situation that to me is an unnecessary issue. So.
Okay,
Questions, concerns?
other questions, comments? I mean, again, this is a one-off to do the jail, and then we need the process in place, and it sounds like Brian knows how to do that, and we just need to keep in touch, at least a monthly basis, as these properties come into our possession. I'm okay with the recommendation, the 10,112. I don't know about everybody else. Again, we're gonna get the lion's share of that back very soon. So, Dave Eflin, any other thoughts?
Mr. Chair, a little hard to hear on my end, so
Yeah.
I apologize if I missed things, but
I was proposing, I think we ought to move forward with this proposal, the 10,112, to cover that for now. Obviously, the jail presumably will be sold very soon, and that coverage will drop off quickly.
yeah, I think it's, this is all complicated by the fact that obviously we're a new land bank and we don't have staff on board to help monitor this. We obviously have we have county staff that is helping out in various ways, but I think as we get more active, that's something we should consider, just because all the rest of us as directors and even the staff that's helping out have other duties and assignments to attend to as well.
Yep.
It's easy to kind of lose the minutia of exactly how does the process work for just insuring property, let alone bringing it in the land back and disposing of it.
Yep. Yeah, very
I
important.
agree. I think the county jail is kind of it's just a unique animal, and
In many
we
ways.
need to we are dealing with that one. We have been dealing with it a little bit differently and filling it out as we go. But the policies and procedures will be important moving forward.
Yeah, and
Mr. Chairman,
Treasurer
I'll
Ranky
second
has.
your motion.
Yeah, the what? I'm sorry.
I'll second your motion.
Okay. I was just going to mention, Don has put together a proposal to provide staffing through the Finance Authority, and Bob's on board with doing that, because we are going to need, if not full-time, significant part-time staff to administer and take care of all these properties that are coming in the coming months. So we have a plan going forward to address that. And in the transition, we're kind of working our way through this. So, okay, we have a motion and a second. Sarah, let's do a roll call, just make sure everybody's on board.
While I have the microphone, if I can remind everyone, for Dave's sake, to speak into the microphone when speaking, so if it be heard. Mr. Bitton?
Aye.
Mr. Merrill?
Aye.
Mr. Ranky?
Aye.
Mr. Eflin?
Aye.
Mr. Schuling?
Aye.
Okay, so we're set with insurance for the time being.
That's
And then
correct.
as
As of today.
As
we've
of
got
today,
everything
we're
put
good.
together.
Thank you.
Don, I'll get
Right.
with you with other issues on that.
Okay, that
And Brian,
sounds
we
great.
just confirm with something that they've taken care of the course of reduction at
Yes.
the amount that we're getting back.
Yes, we will get that taken care of. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brian. Okay, that was one important thing that we needed to get done. I want to make sure everyone had a copy of the D&O policy. That's why I asked Brian to bring that, so you guys will have a copy of that for your files. Okay, next on the agenda is another administrative topic, and that is we need to get signatories on the checking account at First Commonwealth, correct?
Yes.
And there is just one checking account, First Commonwealth?
Yes.
Okay. So I assume we need a board resolution to provide to First Commonwealth saying these signers are authorized. Typically, that's what we're after.
I have not seen one for the first set, but that's not to say I can't get one together.
Okay, well,
In the meantime, we could have a motion and second and vote.
yeah, I was gonna say, that would probably suffice for the bank's purposes, that they have a resolution on the board authorizing these signers. The proposal is to have the chair, the vice chair, and the treasurer be authorized signers.
And I believe I'm already authorized.
Yeah,
to
you're
sign.
probably, yeah. So, anybody want to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. Second by Commissioner Merrill. Further discussion? Okay, we'll just do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, so we have, we've got the signatories. Sarah, you do have the paperwork though, right?
I
For
do.
everybody to sign? So
Yes.
we'll get that done. Next topic is something that Mr. Ranky has proposed, and it's more of a discussion item at this point, but as I alluded to earlier, there needs to be some coordination with the treasurer's office on various topics, managing properties and transitioning properties in particular. So, Don, you want to talk about your?
I'm going to briefly talk about it and then turn it over to Mr. Lamb. We currently have 1,006 properties that are in the delinquent tax status. These are properties that have been delinquent for as long as 10 years. And so we have a process that once a year, taxis comes in and kind of, for lack of a better term, cherry pick the properties they want, and that's done once a year. And then once they're done, the balance of the properties, which are these 106 properties, it amounts to right now a little bit under 9 million today, they get kicked down the road, and there's no process to deal with those. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Mrs. Schiffel has been kind enough to assign Tyler, who is a huge resource, to the treasurer's office. Matter of fact, I'm thinking about getting him an ancillary office down in the treasurer's office, first floor. And we'll be getting together along with a couple other folks on Friday, determine of those 1,006 properties, how many of them we think they'll all get into foreclosure at this point, but how many probably won't get sold in the foreclosure process. And as you know, if they go through the foreclosure process twice and they don't have a bid, then they kind of go into the auditor's never land, and then the land bank has the option to pick them up, which then gets rid of all the liens on them, which is another process that, that we're working very closely with Tyler on. So we're getting together to try to give the chair and the rest of the land bank a better idea of how many of those 1,006 properties. I think it could be 5%, which would be 50 properties. That's a huge number of properties.
That is a lot of properties.
And they're all different kinds, sizes. I mean, you just haven't missed much. So, and if I'm wrong and it's 20%, that's, So I've been working with Mr. Lamb and Mr. Stage in regards to coming up with a solution that we could have some staff that would be able to move freely within the governmental agencies to try to come up with a plan and work on these things, because there's just a variety of issues. So I asked Bob to put together a draft intergovernmental agreement. So Bob, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lamb, who's our economic development director, our very talented economic development director.
Yeah, this is going to be really important because we do have a lot of properties coming forward. And I want to commend Treasurer Ranke for identifying it and trying to address it. And because we do need, I assume all that's happening is just the taxes we're just continuing to compile.
They just
Year
compile.
after year, and the penalties and interest just continue to add up. And
They literally just sit there, and they just literally sit there and get kicked down the can. So we have a little bit longer strategy I won't go through today, but a big part of this strategy is what happens when they get to no bids and they're coming the land bank's way if they want. So.
Okay. Bob?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. Bob Lamb, Economic Development Director. Treasurer Ranke, along with David Stage, Treasurer of Delaware County Finance Authority, have been working on this plan to help the land bank be able to address some of the goals that it's established while dealing with many of the challenges that a new organization faces in setting it up. And it was determined through multiple conversations that perhaps a pathway forward was an intergovernmental agreement between the two parties. The Finance Authority very recently, just in the last 5.5 years or so, really altered its structure and format so that it could bring forward a multitude of tools to help the community, moving from approximately $15,000 in the bank to almost $3 million in owning property. I believe they have the resources and knowledge to help with this process. My staff has served throughout that time period, assisting in that process as well. We do have experience with acquiring property, insuring property, managing it after the recent 1.5 years or so of doing that. We're also working on other properties currently for the county, so we believe there's a good tie-in in managing it through an intergovernmental agreement so that we can leverage our resources here at the county to help other entities that are also serving the community. And I'm happy to answer any questions on this item or turn it over to Treasurer Stage if you'd like to add anything.
Oh, come on.
Dave.
Can we please put that in the minutes?
Yeah. Dave didn't want to speak.
Well, tell them a little bit about how we think it would work. And, there would be an agreement between the Treasurer's Office, the Land Bank, and the Finance Authority, with the commissioners signing off to give Bob the authority to actually be the lead person he'd be the lead employee within the land bank. He'd be the executive director. And the second part of it is I'm hoping that sometime in the very near future I can get the greatest 3 commissioners that I know of in the whole world to expand my budget. I'm certainly going to show them how it's going to pay for itself, but to add a chief investment officer, and then this chief investment officer would spend 20% of their time, and they would be the program coordinator working for Bob. And so it would start out as a two-person department, and while we're growing and trying to get a feel for what we're actually going to deal with, that if we need any extra help, then Doug Crew's been recently promoted to senior deputy treasurer. He would step in with maybe one of his people to help Bob and this additional person. And I know that Bob has also said that they would, they being the economic development department, they could help. And then at some point, you know, we would bring back to the land bank if we needed to hire any additional resources. Why don't you explain to them how we weren't going to pay for all this?
Yeah, so the cost would really be covered through the actions of the land bank, as well as funds that the developer has, that the treasurer has available at his discretion as well. So we're not looking at this structure placing any additional cost to the general fund, and making sure that the land bank remains a self-sustaining entity that's leveraging its resources to better serve the community.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, clearly, I think this is a very good proposal. I mean, we're going to need management and leadership on this in the immediate future. So, you know, again, I appreciate Bob being willing to take on oversight of that, and because there's just a lot of details in managing and acquiring and then disposing of these properties. So I'm glad we're thinking ahead. And Don, I want to thank you for proposing all this, and everybody else who worked on it. So, we're not asking for a vote at this point.
No.
We need to get more structure to it and finalize the proposal. So,
But we're hoping that maybe next month's land bank meeting, we could have more discussion and
maybe a vote.
if appropriate, vote
Formalize
on
the
it.
agreement. Okay. Anything else, Bob? Anything else you wanted to add at this point?
I think at this point, I just appreciate the fact the conversations are occurring between the various parties. My office is happy to help as best it can.
Okay. Dave, any other questions or thoughts for us?
No.
Whoop, I meant Dave Eflin. But come on up, Dave Stage. Come on up, Dave Stage.
Strike that out of
No,
the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to see, it'd be interesting to see the written draft of what an ITA might look like in that regard. I think it gives some pretty quick help, staffing wise, to the land bank, and it makes the three entities could work together well.
Yeah. Okay.
And then just speaking for the Finance Authority, you know, I think it's fair to say that we've always been willing to work to move things forward with the county. We haven't always looked even to get any financial gain out of that. And I'm not going to say that that's the case with this, but you know, obviously we're going to work with you to get things moving so we can manage this, because there are a lot of abandoned properties, many of them
Just been ignored.
going to be hard to find a market for, unless we can figure out some way to bundle some of them or something. And you know, they're not all here in Delaware either, so you know, we're going to have to work outside the city on a lot of these. We can do that.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Dave. Okay. We'll plan on addressing that in more detail at the next meeting. Next topic, before we get into talking about the old jail, is Sunny V. I don't think anything has really happened since our meeting a couple weeks ago, Doug. I don't think, not heard. Okay. Just for those who are listening, Sunny V is a retirement nursing home on the northwest side of Delaware that has gone through foreclosure and been to the sheriff's sale with no bidders for two events, which is required. So it is now in that auditor's kind of limbo where it's available to be taken by the land bank and the liens eliminated. But before we would do anything, we need to understand the potential liabilities of that property. One thing, and it kind of definitely ties into the discussion item number 10, and that is, I learned from a webinar in the last couple of weeks ago, I think it was, that land banks do not have exposure liability for environmental cleanup costs. And that's great. I mean, again, that's the whole purpose of land banks, is to deal with problem properties, and many of them have environmental issues. So we're protected as a land bank from environmental liability, but, and then Commissioner Merrill, you made the point, and this is an excellent point. Well, if we take on a property with environmental issues, it could be that the environmental issues prevent a buyer from buying it. And therefore, we could be stuck with it, even though we don't have to pay for the environmental cleanup. So I think we need more research on that, because before we would acquire Sunny V, we know there are some environmental concerns there. We haven't done any review at this point, but we need to do that. So that's kind of where we are. I think we need to, and that's why I'm interested in everybody's thoughts on how we approach environmental. I did, in the past couple of weeks, get the names of a couple environmental reviewers, environmental review consultants, who can do this sort of work. Interested in everybody's thoughts.
I asked Tyler, again, we're going to get him an office downstairs, but I asked Tyler again to look at all the protections under the Ohio Revised Code, and he did a summary email, which I forwarded on to everyone. So if anybody has any questions in regards to that, or if you would like him to come to the next meeting with more specifics, I think he'd be happy to do that. He's just been an invaluable asset for the Treasurer's Office. I will tell you that I think that what I see the potentials, having dealt with a few of these buildings that have been vacant for a long time, old hotels and different downtowns around the state of Ohio, the biggest thing would be pigeons that have been trapped in the building, pigeons droppings, dead pigeons. There's that gets into the air and stays into the air, and is very dangerous for a person's lungs. Then two, obviously, the roof leaks, the continual roof leaks that we have no idea about, that water getting down through the first and second floor to where you could have mold and black mold on the plaster already, and obviously it depends on whether it's asbestos plaster or horse plaster or things of that nature, but it still soaks through. But it soaks through to the could soak through to the studs, and once it gets to the studs, then the building could be just a tear down at that point. Obviously, the roof issue. So there's those types of environmental issues that just hit me right out of the gate. So, my thought would be to set up a time where we could, if the board wanted to, in the appropriate protection. I mean, I'm telling you,
I'm telling you, statute wants to go through the building.
I'm going to tell you that it would be good for us to go through. Now, I'm going to tell you that we should probably go through hazmats and have stuff so that if there are dead pigeons, that we have protections for our breathable air. Well, why don't we just send our executive county administrator through and have him give us? No, I'm just teasing. I saw
an engineer.
I know he is. That would be good. My suggestion is, we consider either going through the building with all safety precautions, so the five of us could take a look at it. I think that Dave and the city would be interested in seeing that process, in getting into it and actually seeing where we stand with some of that. Or, as you said, Mr. Chairman, hiring an environmental company to go in and do that for us and then giving us a report.
Well, they could do some sort of video or something, I would think that could.
They could do
serve
what?
the same purpose. Someone could go through taking a videos, so we just have two people going through it rather than all of us. And doing
Yeah,
a video that we could
I have
insert.
no particular interest in going through that building, quite honestly. But no, my whole point was that building has real concerns, and even though, technically we don't have the liability for it, if we take ownership of it, we could get stuck with a building with no or negative
We just
value.
saw the cost of insurance, so.
Yeah, and there's a cost to carry. So despite our no environmental liability technically, I would recommend we get an environmental review done, at least a phase one, depending on what they find. We may go to a phase two.
You're gonna automatically, I didn't mean to interrupt, sir.
Yeah.
But you're automatically gonna need to go to a phase two. And I forgot that the additional buildings that are out there, they're flat roofs and they're drywall. So the drywall is a bigger issue for the water getting into them.
True.
So, and they've not been occupied in what, 17 years? Has it been 17 years, Dave?
It's
Since
been
that
at
been
least-
occupied.
Yeah, it's been quite some time, and beyond the environmental issues, when we're doing code enforcement demolitions, there's lots of regulations, state code relative to asbestos, which could be in things like tile mastic, pipe insulation, and other things.
And it is in the floor. The asbestos, Dave, there is asbestos floor.
It doesn't necessarily have to be the land bank, depending on our disposition of property, but certainly making sure that we feel comfortable environmentally with the property, even if we have a ORC shield with respect to that. There may not be an owner to go back to or any money from an owner to go back to correct an issue. And it may create a problem with the disposition of that property. So I think Sunny B again is another good, nice and easy one-off that we're kind of starting with here. But it's also not going anywhere. I'd be happy to go through the building. I know we've been through the building in the past, and we actually reported it up as people have broken into it and things like that. But without that phase, it might be a good idea to have two things, in my opinion. Look at I've pulled out our old acquisition policies that we had approved already, and our disposition policies, which are germane maybe to the rest of our agenda today. And I think, maybe we could dig into those a little bit. Don and Mike, I don't even know if they have those, because I think we approved them before they were on the land bank, which we should get them a copy. And maybe as part of that, we could take sort of this notion of environmental liability A, and then with respect to acquisition and disposition of property, what might be a policy we could come up with? Do we have an environmental consultant on contract that does a phase one for us in the case of every acquisition of property, or maybe it's not every one of them if we're simply acting as a pass through with no, as is. So I think those are things that it would help to help guide us all to have a policy while we recognize we still have to be flexible and take on odd situations.
The bottom line, if there's not a market for that property, there's absolutely no reason we should be involved with that property. Because it'd just be an anchor around our necks or the land bank's neck. So, and I know sometimes sentimentality gets involved in these things. And it may well be that we should be looking for money in the state that might be to demolition of the building. And because the lot may be worth more, 2 lots, whatever it is, may be worth more than leaving that eyesore standing. But there was a potential buyer at one time. Did that person go away?
No, they're still interested.
Are they? Okay.
But they're waiting for, the liens to be extinguished.
Here's
Mr. Chairman, I've heard from at least 3 different individuals with different end-use goals in mind on that property, potentially. But again, I think that, the land bank might be the one entity, because we're not gonna be dealing with market rate easy properties. That's just not the end of the pool. We're gonna
Very
be
true.
splashing in. We splash in the difficult properties that are underwater and upside down for various and sundry reasons. And so I think that that's just part of the land bank's role, and this is a good example of one of those. But taking a look at our disposition of property policy, before we acquire it, kind of having at least a sketched out process or end use or user. In the case of, for example, Columbus Avenue, I know we had that lot on the agenda. we do have an entity, it's nonprofit, that would seem to fulfill our disposition of property there policy. But it's under me, I don't think we've sketched out the idea that far.
No.
But that may play into whether you have to do environmental cleanup or, before we even know what's even in there, if there is something to clean up.
Well, I'm going to go back and kind of follow up with what Gary said and give you a couple of situations. I'm very familiar with the property from 1985 to 2006. I basically lived across, my family lived across the street because we first house was at 206 North Franklin, and then the other house that we called home was at 266. I've owned in probably 10 or 12 houses on North Franklin Street, all in that 2-block area. So, and I give you an example of what happened previous. There was a nursing home that was an old fraternity house that was a multifamily. When it was first done, it had a Mexican type of design. It was at the corner of Washington Street and Griswold. And it was finally bought after years and years and years. It was bought by Roger Koch, and he had the building torn down. It cost him twice as much as he thought to do the demo, and then it took him, I think, 7 or 8 years before he found people that would buy those lots. And I don't think he broke even. He should probably get an award for taking one for the team on that. In this particular regards, Commissioner Merrill, I think that we have a community responsibility that if the land bank could step in and try to figure out what to do, that Northwest Historical group, I don't want to call them group, but folks, will be, one, there's tremendous concerns about that property with them. Poor Doc Smith has lived next to that piece of property for, I don't know, for 40 years probably. But I think, is there a compassionate, or is there a part of our responsibility, should there be a compassionate part of it that says, well, we need to try to figure out as the land bank how to do something, whether it's to get grants. I think that's a great idea, by the way. Another reason why we need to have the intergovernmental agreement with the Finance Authority, because that staff could actually write the grants, and I think there are grants available to tear down at least the new additions, because the new additions need to be torn down. Whether the main house can be saved or not, I don't know. There's a lot of historical value because originally there was an underground tunnel between the Chi Phi fraternity, which is on the other corner, and that house. And so that tunnel was still in place through like the mid-1990s when the city finally came in and filled it in under there. So there was part of the underground railroad. So there could be historical value. Obviously, with the Methodist Church, there's some historical value with those 3 properties being there. Whether or not we could save it or not, I don't know. I think getting a phase 2, I think Mr. Eflin's correct. We could do a phase 1, but we're going to need to do a phase 2 anyways. Okay. And maybe that's the route to start. And then maybe, Mr. Chairman, you could talk somebody into going into that building with Mr. Eflin, since I think he said he would go do it.
Okay, I'm not afraid of it. I'll go.
No, in fact, that's where I thought that's where I was going to suggest we go, is do an environmental review as the first step in developing a plan for this property, because if there's $200,000 to $300,000 of environmental cleanup, I don't think we want to do that.
We don't. Or I mean, I would tell you I wouldn't.
Yeah.
But I do think, do you think that there's a compassionary issue in regards to trying to help out that area of town, since it's the property values in the historical districts have literally gone up by 100%, which is crazy. It's good.
Yeah, no, I do, and that's a big part of what the land bank's mission is to fix blighted areas, blighted properties, et cetera. I mean, take on the tough tasks that Dave's referring to. So I would recommend, I guess I'll make that a motion, that we contract with one of the environmental review consulting firms to do a phase 2 environmental review on this and report back at the next meeting, and we'll learn a lot from that.
I'll second that motion.
Everybody okay with that?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Sure.
I like your motion. I heard bits and pieces of it sound like doing a phase 2 environmental. I just want to make sure we have the legal authority to enter the property. I'm assuming we do at this point in the process, and if we do, I have no problem voting for that motion and get some more information. That'll help inform any decision.
I'll get Tyler to get the okay from Auditor Kaitsa, because really Auditor Kaitsa is somewhat in control of that. So Tyler, would you mind following up and just asking Auditor Kaitsa if we could have access to, and we're going to probably have to get a locksmith too, because I mean, I'm sure nobody has keys to that property. The city, does the city?
Probably could just give me one of the boards that we've had to put up through the year.
Would that be okay or not, Tyler?
Yeah.
To just get his permission, or just get his
Our
authority?
our attorney, Scott Gordon, just came in. Scott, you're saying it's okay, we have
Yeah,
legally,
there's statutory authority for the ability to do that. I think Mr. Rankin's suggestion of at least notifying the auditor that we
Sure.
intend to do that
Sure.
now, but I guess I haven't seen it, but I presume that it's now on the forfeited list.
yeah, I'm pretty sure
so
it is.
Notifying that would be a good
Yeah.
practice.
Dave Scott is saying we do have the authority, but we need to notify the auditor, and that makes sense. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
In the
Commi-
authority, can I amend that?
Comment from,
I was just gonna say, for what it's worth, Commissioner Benton, there's been a window open in that building all winter. So you just like-
Have you done that?
all right.
Can
Yes,
I
Mr.
amend
Rankin.
your amendment to
Sure.
add and give the chair the authority to sign the agreement or contract with the environmental?
Oh, okay, good point. All right, we have a motion amended that way. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion is advanced. We have a number of topics before we get into the main other topic that we wanted to get into. And I would suggest that we change the order of the agenda at this point to go into the discussion of the offers on the historic jail. Everybody okay with that? Gary?
The chair should file.
Okay, why don't we do that? The other big topic for today, we've covered a couple important ones already, but the other really big topic is to review the offers of, that we have received on the sale of the historic old jail behind us here at 20 West Central. So now to do that, we can go into executive session to discuss that. So if do I have a motion to go into executive session?
Go into executive session to discuss the property,
Yeah, discuss
property for sale.
property for sale, second by Mr. Schuling. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, opposed? All right. We are now in an executive session.